to try to get out of here and get people back on schedule. Thank you very much. Good morning, committee and guests. We're going to go ahead and start the hearing on House Bill 2106.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill number 2106, as amended by the House Committee of the Whole, would amend KSA 793606 to provide a sales tax exemption for sales of equipment, machinery, software, ancillary components, appurtenances, accessories, or other infrastructure purchased for use in the provision of communication services, and services purchased by a provider of communication services that are used in the repair, maintenance, or installation in such communication service. There is also a definition of communication service in the bill. You'll find this provision starting on page 38. The exemption would expire and have no effect on and after July 1st of 2028, and the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. The bill passed the House on March 9th on a vote of 108 to 13, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions for Amelia? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, our first proponent is Josh Idu, or I do, and I should know that, Josh, I apologize. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee. And my name is John Idu. I'm with Brightspeed. I know some of you recognize the face, might not recognize the company Brightspeed. We used to be called CenturyLink. And the history of that over the past 6 months is in your testimony, and I'll just kind of skip over that. But Brightspeed is investing in Kansas. We are an incumbent carrier. We are investing in fiber. We've already announced plans for 3 communities yet this year. That's on top of what we've already done up until now, and we'll be doing more significant investment fiber builds here in Kansas in the future. As you just heard, House Bill 2106 will provide a sales tax exemption on communications equipment. And this will not only help Brightspeed in multiple ways, but it will help the state as well. This software exemption is similar to quite a few other states. Kansas is kind of an outlier right now in not offering this exemption. And we've run this bill, tried to get this passed in the bill passed in the past with not a lot of success here in Kansas. And the big pushback is it's always been a corporate welfare, and I'll just kind of throw that out there and address that issue. I mean, this is not in any way corporate welfare. What this will do is it will allow communications companies to deploy more fiber farther out to areas that currently are unserved or underserved. Let me explain real briefly how that will help. Most companies will have a set number of capital investment, whether it's 5 million, 10 million, 50 million for the state. That's what it is, and it includes all type of surcharges and taxes. If we're able to save a little money on the sales tax exemption, we're not going to reduce our budgets. Our budgets are going to stay the same, allowing more money to go into the fiber and push it out further. A second way it helps is a lot of these projects, broadband math is not fun. A lot of these projects are high capital, serving few customers, and many of these projects just don't make sense from a business case perspective. If we can save a little bit money on the sales tax, it's going to make more projects move from yellow to green and hopefully go into actual deployment. So it's going to improve the overall project viability for many of those projects that are kind of on the fence. And then let's not forget that telecom customers, whether it's wireless, wireline, they already pay a substantial amount of taxes on the back end, whether it's federal excise tax, franchise fees, 911 tax, the KUSF, the federal USF. There's already a substantial amount of taxes that telecommunications customers pay. So this is not a parity issue, it's not a fair issue, because those customers are already paying substantial taxes on the back end. And I will just touch briefly, and I'm going quickly to allow for questions and allow some additional testifiers, but there will be a substantial amount of money coming to Kansas as far as federal broadband support. It's been estimated somewhere between $200 million and $250 million, starting probably in 2024. There's no public policy rationale to provide federal funding and then turn around and tax it. And that's what's being done without this exemption. I mean, that's a lot of money going to the cities and the counties that otherwise could be going to further broadband it out into rural Kansas. So I know I kind of threw a lot at you very quickly, but I will stand for questions, Madam Chair. All right. That is much better. I'll go ahead and start over.
So thank you. Well, and John, thank you. There's a typo, so it did say Josh. I didn't realize it was you, so it's good to.
Oh, no, that's fine. I've been called worse.
Yeah. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, I am a happy Brightspeed customer.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, so a couple of questions for you. I know we have a fiscal note here for the state impact. I assume the local units are taking a hit if we pass this.
Yes.
Do we know about how much relative to the state?
I do not know that.
Okay.
But keep in mind, the money will be turned around and plowed right back into local communities. They will be getting the franchise fees tax and all those other taxes. I mean, they currently receive a substantial amount of these taxes on the back end of the bill.
Senator Holland.
And so just a follow-up question, Madam Chair. As far as you're talking about, you guys have a number of federal incentives coming online now.
Yep.
Correct? So help me out here. I don't understand, with all the federal dollars that are being pumped down to the locals to get units deployed, why removing the tax is going to be any discernible difference on whether you guys build out the network or not. Help me out with that.
Well, every single project, whether it's 100% privately funded or a match of 50-50, every single project still needs to prove out. The economics still must be there. And at some point, you're going to have to draw a line and say, we can only go this far outside of the city limits, and the financials just don't make sense. By removing the 5-10% sales tax, it's going to lower the cost and improve the business cases so you can go out a little bit further. That's one way. And the second way is it's going to free up additional capital so we can take on additional projects.
Senator Holland.
The whole federal issue, though, is that it's incentivizing the telecoms to explicitly expand into more rural, inaccessible areas. So I don't see why why this really has a germane effect on that. But
That is the goal, that is the intent. But even with that federal money, and there's state money available too on some of these projects, they still have to prove out in the business case. I mean, you just can't do a 5-mile fiber run to only hook up one customer, and that's not unrealistic in Kansas, even with federal money. I mean, the math doesn't work.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
So, and John, I completely understand that, especially where we live and have family members and friends. And he wouldn't be experiencing that because he's in a more urban area, although I am experiencing it in a very rural area. Thank you. Senator Holland.
No, I do experience that. I totally understand the last mile.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood since you said you were a satisfied customer of Bright Smart. So, thank you. Committee, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Jamison,
Thank you, Madam
welcome
Chair.
to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, ma'am. Jim Jamison, State President of AT&T Kansas. In interest of time, I'll sort of truncate my remarks. Mr. Idu has stated well some of the reasons for this legislation. AT&T, like many providers, doing all it can to roll out broadband to the, all areas of the state. We've spent over $1 billion since 2017. We're incredibly proud of that, and we're trying to do as much as we can. Senator Holland, you asked a couple of very insightful questions. This bill has a fiscal note of $17 million. I think the local piece is probably on the order of $5 million spread across the entire state. So I don't believe any specific municipality is going to take a huge hit on that. But, you know, this is an industry bill. It's got buy-in from all the providers. This is about not just installing, but upgrading on a continual basis the facilities we use. I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay.
Committee, any questions? Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions, just to give you a heads up.
Senator, please keep in mind, we are short on time because we didn't get the room in time. Thank you.
I know I have a list here of the numbers. I think about 10 organizations affiliated with telecommunications received the federal funds that was referred to. AT&T seems like received maybe $2.2 million, and there was a match of $8.2 million from AT&T.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm glad to see that, but there's also, when you're going into rural areas, they become your customers, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So in that way, they are also going to be paying for your service and the fiber that you're going to be installing. So what I'm trying to get at with the exemptions is for corporations such as yourself, and if you're going to get 16 million 1 year and 17 million together in exemptions, and you're also receiving grant funds, which I think is also taxpayer funds, how will this help the local person that's paying the bill?
What it'll do is allow us to deploy and connect more Kansans. You're exactly right. Those customers we're connecting will become customers. They'll, you know, they're paying a relatively small amount relative to some of those investments. But this will allow us to get to many more customers across the state.
So my thinking is you would be receiving two types of funds from taxpayer funds to come back to corporations such as yourself. I think broadband is very, very important, but I'm worried about the cost is not going to reflect in their own bills. And I don't see how that's going to happen if we go forward with the $16 million exemptions and then next year 15 million, and at least for 3 years, it'll be in the millions.
It generally will not show up in consumers' bills. Consumers' bills for broadband especially are typically set at a national level. But what it will allow us to do is connect more Kansans. I can't tell you how many more Kansans, but every dollar we pay in taxes is a dollar we can't put into our network.
Exactly. Thank you. And they'll also be customers. Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
very much.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I see that the bill was introduced at the request of AT&T. Question, Mr. Jamison, the House added a sunset. Any heartburn with that, or are you good with the sunset?
I don't think it needs a sunset. I mean, if you look through the other exemptions in Chapter 3606, we're one of the few, if not only, provisions with a sunset. I think it's good policy with or without a sunset. You know, my personal preference is that we not, the bill not have a sunset. I'd ask you to consider eliminating that. But I'm happy to come back year after year and tell you about what all we're doing to.
Well, I appreciate that answer. I was curious. I like sunsets, but apparently you would prefer not. But since this was basically AT&T's bill originally, I thought I'd ask that. Thank you.
I think you're characterizing that, but the other folks in the room would, it's an industry bill. We're all very much in support of it.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
Next is Jason Watkins. I don't see Jason. We'll refer to his written testimony. Is there any other proponents? Seeing none, I'll refer you to written testimony from John from Verizon, John Federico, Patrick Fusick, David Stoffer, and Eric Stafford, all written testimony. Are there any opponents? Seeing none, I will refer the committee to Spencer Duncan, written opponent. Any neutral? Seeing none, I will refer, there's no written neutral. We'll close the hearing on House Bill 2106. Senator Reddy, would you like a point of personal privilege?
Yes, thank you. We just got into it really quick, and I didn't have a chance.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have 5 pages, and Aiden, I'll introduce him first. Aiden, would you please stand up? He is shadowing me today. He's one of the recipients. He's a candidate for the Youth of the Year candidate for Boys and Girls Club. Glad to have you here with us this morning, Aiden. I have 5 pages. Olivia, Taylor, Addison, Justice, and Maitland. If you can stand up real quick, that'd be great. Thank you. They're from Riley School and Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the Tax Committee. Committee will open the hearing on Senate Bill 125. Amelia? Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 125 relates to income tax and would amend KSA 79-32-143 to allow a net operating loss from the sale of certain historic hotels to be carried back 3 years under certain circumstances that are enumerated in the bill. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, questions? Seeing none, thank you. Paul Feeney is first conferee. Welcome back to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Paul Finney from Humboldt, where I led the historic preservation effort. And with the hotel in question, I put my money where my mouth was, and it was not profitable. The bank called my note, and I had to sell farms that I had pledged in order to pay the bank because nobody wanted to buy the hotel. Now, I'm going to read the rest of my testimony because...
No, Paul, please don't. Would you
Okay.
summarize your testimony and give us your story? We do have a very short time today, sorry.
Okay. Yes. So anyway, when the hotels, I sold at farms at a huge capital gain because I used the value of them in 1931 when my grandfather died and left them to his daughter's unborn children. It was in what's called a generation skipping trust. I felt it was the honest thing to do. But my father and mother were very honest people and always obeyed the law. And this is a ledger book from 1931 listing the value of the property. And they taught us children, if we ever sold any farms, to use these values. And so that's what I did. If I had used the value when my mother died, there wouldn't have been a problem. There's the difference between $5 and $1,000 an acre. At the time, on my federal return, so the hotels sold the next year after I paid the bank off by selling farms. On my federal return, I could take the loss on the hotel backwards to offset my gain, or my loss rather, on the hotel. But on my Kansas return, I could not do that because I assume once when the legislature was short of money, they decided that was a place to capture some revenue. But they provided that after 10 years, you could get your money back. But the 2012 tax bill, which was supposed to be a tax reduction, it ended the provision that you could get your money back after 10 years. And that's why, you know, it's not considered fair to change the rules in the middle of the game, and that's what happened to me. And I ask you to please pass Senate Bill 125. Now, allow me to say that Humboldt is booming, and I started the whole thing by starting the historic preservation movement and by doing the hotel, and that last year Humboldt was listed in the New York Times as one of 52 places in the world to visit. So that's why the addendum to my testimony I entitled Ad Astra per Aspera. So we have reached for the stars and even touched them, but I need your help, please, with the difficulties.
Thank you, Paul. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, you were one of the individuals that was caught up. There were a lot of businesses also that were not able to take their losses after that legislation, so had many unintended consequences. Seeing no questions, thank you, Paul. Are there any other proponents for the bill? Seeing none, any opponents for the legislation? Seeing none, any neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 125. Committee, I'm going to turn your attention to House Bill 2002. Eddie, would you mind handing out? Amelia, would you mind giving us an overview?
House Bill number 2002 would remove the upcoming sunset of the disbursements from the Taxpayer Notification Costs Fund. If you'll recall, in 792989, it provided for reimbursement of printing and postage costs to counties from the Taxpayer Notification Costs Fund related to the revenue neutral rate hearing notices. That provision was for calendar years 22 and 23 only. This bill proposes to remove those tax years so that reimbursements would be continuing after calendar year 2023.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, are there any questions for Amelia? Seeing none. So committee, what has been handed out is a proposed template. I don't know, earlier in the session, we had the template that actually went out to counties and to property owners during the revenue neutral rate notices. The top of the letter said notice of ad valorem. Most people had no idea what it was. So what this is, I did not want to go through legislation, but several of us working together on this issue decided that that's probably the best route, is to try and legislate this letter so that we don't have that confusion. And clerks did not realize they had flexibility with the letter, so they sent the template out as is. I think some of them would have done that anyway to try to be misleading, but we do have some great clerks in the state that have worked with us and tried to get the best possible product, and I very much appreciate their efforts. So committee, I would like to send this with you to have you look over it, and then we will continue working this legislation tomorrow. But my intent is to place this into the contents of whatever we amend 2001 and 2002 to include this with it. Is there any other discussion on the bill 2002? Senator Holland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for clarification, so this is the proposed notice that each property taxpayer would receive?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So any suggestions, anything that the committee would like to see different, please let me know, and we'll try to work through that and get the template updated for tomorrow to hand out. Any other questions? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also in our folder on House Bill 2002 is the document prepared by the Department of Revenue as far as reimbursements that were received. 13 counties did not receive reimbursement. Is that because they didn't know to request, or did they not send those out?
I cannot speak why the counties did not. I think all counties knew that they could be reimbursed. There was only one county that I'm aware of statewide that did not send the notices out. There may have been a couple of others also.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. I know it depends on what county you're in. Montgomery County, they actually had over 100 people show up to one of these meetings the first year. So it depends on what county you're in. I think as people learn of this process, that we will start seeing quite a few more. I attended some meetings throughout the state. One of the meetings, disappointedly, the county clerk told the commissioners to quote, unquote, to quote, take the black eye, quote, in order to vote for the property tax increase. So I have a feeling it's going to be a little different scenario this year, that people are going to show up for these meetings, especially with the valuations that we've seen. So any other questions, committee? Okay, we will pick up this legislation tomorrow. I don't want to move on it today so that you have plenty of time to digest it. Committee, I'll turn your attention to, just a second. Senate Bill 128. Committee, while we're waiting, I'm going to do something a little different. I would like to ask the Department of Revenue on the valuation notices on House Bill 2201. David, would you mind, I heard that there might be some logistics problems with going back 4 years on the valuations. Would you mind addressing that for us?
Sure. Good morning, David Harper, Division of Property Valuation. As we talked to the counties, their only concern was we'd probably go to most of our front and back document now. Some of these, especially on when you have multiple uses of properties, so you have a residential, a commercial, and ag, some of them could roll over into a 3-page document. So that was
3-page as a
yes.
result of the change?
Right.
Okay.
Talked to like Johnson County. I think I sent you some samples of those notices. Johnson County actually has an appeal form on the back of theirs. Talking to their appraiser, they would just make that a flyer and include in with the valuation notices. So yeah, so that was the only concern I had or heard.
Okay. Committee, any other questions for David on that? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, that was, I guess, a related concern I had is just from an administrative standpoint, obviously we have very big automated counties. We have much smaller, more probably manually oriented counties. Just from an administrative standpoint, have you gotten any feedback as far as just their ability to add the additional back years on, just from a technology perspective or an expenditure perspective? I mean, how much additional burden is this going to be?
I have not from the locals. That would probably fall more on us, being we maintain the computer-assisted mass appraisal system that all 105 counties use. So we would assist them in pulling that information to those notices. I would say the prior years, I think there was, I think we could experiment where if we didn't, if the prior years was kind of just a listing, 2020 was value, assessed value. Right now, we just have them side by side, so I think there's things we can do to gain some more real estate on those documents. There's, in our template, there's also a statement on there about taxation, and now this is valuation, not necessarily a tax increase. We've been talking, I think that would be the perfect place to reference the recent legislation on revenue neutral rate, a more specific statement in there. So, we're trying to experiment what we could do to get that down, but I think we'll be able to help the counties get that data.
Thank you. Senator Holland?
Yeah, just very quickly, David, but we're talking about properties in addition to those that are on the mass appraisal system, right?
Even if they're valued outside the mass appraisal system, the values are stored in the computer's CAMA system, so the values are there
All
regardless.
105 counties have everything in this common repository, so that, as far as pulling that, is not an issue.
Not that I've heard. Again, it'll fall on our CAMA staff to help them get that data, but I have not heard any issues on that.
No, thank you. And David, would you mind confirming that? Because I would like, if logistically feasible, to move on that bill also.
Sure.
And could you also check to see if it was just 1 or 2? Didn't the bill goes back 4 years, I think, 4 prior years?
It does.
Yeah.
Right now, it's current plus 1, and it adds, I think, 4 years. I'd have to go back and look, but it's current plus 4, I think is what it states, but I'd have to check.
If we could take a look at that also.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So Amelia, will you give us an overview on Senate Bill 128?
Yes, Madam Chair, Senate Bill number 128 would establish the Ad Astra Opportunity Tax Credit to provide an income tax credit for taxpayers with eligible dependent children who are not enrolled in public school, beginning with tax year 2023. The tax credit would be in an amount equal to the amount of base aid for the school year that's in effect on January 1 of the tax year for which the credit is being sought. Also, the tax credit would be allowed for each dependent child of a resident taxpayer if that dependent child is enrolled in kindergarten or any grades 1 through 12 in an accredited private school or in a homeschool registered with the Department of Education and was not enrolled in a public school operated by a school district during the tax year. There were previously some amendments made when you were working the bill. As a reminder, the first one related to the refundability of the tax credit, and it amended, it would amend on page 1, line 23, it would remove the refundability and make the tax credit eligible to be carried over for deductibility in future tax years until it's used. The second amendment was a technical amendment to clean up the language in line 14 related to non-accredited private elementary or secondary schools. And then the third amendment was indicated on page 2 that would require it provided that taxpayers may be required to provide documentation of educational expenses.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Amelia, would you go over those amendments really again? Do you mind?
Certainly. The first one amended currently the language of the bill is that the credit would be refundable to the taxpayer. So if the amount of the tax credit exceeded their tax liability, they would receive a refund. That was stricken, and instead the language now is that if the credit exceeds the taxpayer's income tax liability, the taxpayer may carry over the excess amount for deduction from the taxpayer's income tax liability in the next succeeding tax years until the total amount has been deducted from tax liability. The second amendment was a technical amendment to clean up some language on line 14 in page 1 so that it would read non-accredited private elementary or secondary school. And then the third amendment It would be on page 2. It would include a paragraph number D as in dog 3 that would provide the taxpayers may be required to provide documentation of educational expenses, including but not limited to amounts paid for computers, tablets, printers, and there's a list there that includes equipment and supplies.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just a mechanics question, and I think it would be for the Department of Revenue. So how would individuals be notified of what is that base aid for the year? I know right now we have a projection that next year's base aid is going to go up. I believe it's 5.6%. But we don't have that nailed down quite yet. So, does a parent calculate that in, or would that be done in an automated manner where they only indicate the number of children and then that would automate?
Senator, that's a good question. I think we should clean up the language and use the previous base year, and that way everybody knows what it is and it's not a subjective number. That might be the best way to go. Or Amelia, would you have another suggestion? So that it's not a floating number. It's
Currently, the language in the bill is that it's the amount of the base aid for the school year in effect on January 1 of the tax year, which means that you would know it by the time you're filing taxes in the next spring. So it would be something that should be available, I would think.
It's a known number. Thank you, Amelia. Senator Baumgartner.
I think it is a known number. Typically, though, it's known by school district administrators. They track down with that state base aid and the multiplier. So just want to make sure we know where they would access that.
Thank you, Senator. It would be on their filing forms and the data with the filing. Would you like to add to that, Amelia?
I would suspect that the Department of Revenue, I believe, may be here and could respond as well, but I believe it could be something that could be provided on the tax credit filing form, that the amount would be provided and updated annually as needed.
And I would suggest to everyone, there is a very good website, the Department of Revenue's website. I've been out there, I don't want to say how many times recently. And yes, there is quite a bit of information out there. But Kathleen, if you would like to address it, that'd be great.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. We do prepare our forms early. As soon as the legislature is adjourned, we begin preparing the forms. So we would need to know what that base aid is going to be probably by July, August, or September, so we could have it in place for the forms in January. So if there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. And since I have you up here, I received a phone call last night. The Golden Years Homestead Act, that form is confusing to some. I don't know if it's because of the legalese, the language, if there was some way we could possibly make that simpler for individuals, that would be great. But I'm just letting you know.
We can sure look at that for next year.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but you guys have a very informative website. I have been using it quite frequently, so thank you. And your customer service over and above. I actually posted that. I don't usually do that, and thanking the secretary and all of his team. Thank you. Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's always wonderful to have JG in any committee. So he just informed us that base aid, they would know by April, so that would give Department of Revenue ample time. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, it is 10:20. I want to get everybody back on schedule. Since we were late getting into the room, we will pick this up hopefully tomorrow, if not definitely Thursday. Is there any other business to be brought before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.